Well, trend 4 is wireless, and this is actually, I think, a special case of basically everything we've just been talking about, which is that there will be, in the next 12 months, a proliferation of applications based on wireless technologies. Again, the Qualcomm Q phone, the Pocket Science. Companies such as Sharewave, which are producing in-home networking, which is a dubious concept to begin with, but made so much easier because you don't have to string cables trying to get networks into the home. And then on the other end of the spectrum, Teledesic, Aloha networks, which do satellite communications. So, and then, of course, GPS. I'm extremely nervous about these trends all of a sudden. I don't know why.
Which do you think is going to...
They're a bunch of lightweights.
Which do you think will be the most important?
I think the largest impact on our lives in the next year will be global positioning system technologies.
And second most important?
Okay, green or red?
Yeah.
All right. All right.
Mixed up.
Smile, Jason. We're making a comeback.
Yes, I'm sorry.
Okay. John Doerr, tell us how right we are.
I don't think you have the most important one picked out, and I do think that wireless will come of age next year. And I think the best way to see that is to go to the upcoming 3Com Palm Developers Conference. I think it's in December, and you'll see a really compelling wireless application that builds on a number of these trends. I don't think it'll be the phone. I don't think it'll be GPS.
Something completely new, which...
Something like the web on a pilot.
Spoken like an investor.
Right.
And I have no equity interest in 3Com Palm.
So
okay, Mike, you did green. What investments do you have in wireless applications that you want to tell us about?
We don't. We've only ever lost money investing in wireless. And we seem to be doing it...
You were too early.
Fairly regularly by arriving too early in the market. But I think it's obvious that everybody in the venture community has lost money is investing too early in the wireless local area networking business and the wireless in-home business, and that some of the better areas are some of the ones that you identify here with spot applications in particular areas, whether it's GPS or the new bold, big, full-page, double-page red advertisements from Telligent that are in the newspapers over the last 30 days or so. So I think it's those kinds of vertical spot applications that will happen.
Esther.
Well, I just put the red one up so that somebody will send me some of these things for free to prove that they exist. But I do think...
Geez, no matter how much money you make, you still want things free. It's amazing. Only in Silicon Valley.
I do think GPS and something, the equivalent of a childminder, track your kid. As a civil libertarian, you might have problems with this.
Your
but
kid might.
I think that's going to be a big deal.
Cool. Roger,
I'm
red.
still totally red on this. I mean, my guess is we're 10 years away from anything topping either one of these things as an application of wireless technology.
But they are. I mean, they are wireless.
That's my point. That's why. So why is this special for 99? I mean, I haven't had
because they had to fill the space
$1,000 a month on either one of these things in 5 years. I mean, this sucker, just to give you an idea, I get an average 150 stock quotes and news items on the pager every day, have for 6 or 7 years. And, this sucker, people call all the time. And the reality is these are great applications. And the idea that somehow this is special and new for 99.
But wouldn't it be cool if you could do all of that over a single device
no.
and get email?
So why would I want a single point of failure? I can do that already today. I keep two systems.
Because look at you. You look like a medieval knight. You're clutching down.
Okay, trend number 1, online retailers get physical. This recognizes that the net is a distributing, retailing, and marketing channel, but it's not the only channel, and that in the coming year, companies will have to be more robust. Online companies will have to get into the real world in the way that Gateway already has with their Gateway stores, and touch the physical world. In addition, I believe that there's a huge business for companies to help online companies get physical, but discuss amongst yourselves. Agree, disagree. Online gets physical.
Green.
I
Hey,
think-
Stuart.
we're on a roll.
Yeah. I figured you guys would all fall in for this one. You're kind of taking the presumption that online retailers are the thing to watch, and talking about them building a back-end infrastructure so they can ship stuff, which people have been doing for years. And so what you're saying is online retailers have got to figure out how to do something that has been done for years, and that is a fundamental competency of any business that wants to serve its customers. And I think this is a startling realization. And kind of along the lines of making one of those extremely safe predictions so that you can look smart unless somebody challenges you. And I need to challenge this. And I think it's not just a matter of the back-end systems, but how you sort of do the FedEx job. Or it's really a function much more of how you present to the customer. And I know he didn't speak at one of your conferences, but Dave Pottruck from Schwab got up and introduced a concept called clicks and mortar earlier this year, and what he was really talking about was far more sophisticated than what you're predicting here, and I think much more fundamental, which is that companies have to learn to serve customers regardless of where they are. So having a bricks and mortar store or a telephone service person, or having a web page, or even being able to respond to an email, all of these are equally important. So we're not talking about the back end infrastructure; we're talking about the front end. And I think this is a no-op. Just doesn't matter.
Okay. Esther.
I think the real issue is not that the stores themselves need to get physical, but you're going to see a whole lot of logistics startups. If I were looking at a place to hire from, it would be FedEx or UPS. It wouldn't be either Walmart or Amazon.com, but something in the middle. And I just want to end with my favorite pun of the week, which was some guy who mistakenly wrote to me from Eastern Europe about clicks and mortal with an L.
John KP was the only venture investor in Amazon, the supreme example of success in e-commerce. Are they going to end up parceling out their back-end to back-end internet infrastructure startups that Esther is going to fund?
I think not. And I hope in voting for this prediction I didn't predict, or anyone believes that it means that so-called pure cyber commerce companies like Amazon are going to fail. In fact, I think they'll do far better than Walmart and Kmart and other people that are moving online. But I think what we'll see a year from now is that physical portals will emerge to be really powerful, whether it's a web van or a home grocer. The notion of the milkman coming back, you'll have one trusted service that will be allowed to bring things right into the kitchen of your home. And I think the larger thought is, no matter how big we think cyber commerce, great companies like eBay or Amazon might get that don't do much with physical things, they manipulate phosphors, cyber commerce is always going to be a tiny fraction of real commerce. I mean, maybe 10, 15% at the most. And that's why I think this sort of physical importance is going to come into play. And all the .bams, the bricks and mortar companies, are going to .com their businesses to varying degrees of success in the next year.
Yeah, I wasn't disagreeing with this fundamental thing, but there's this danger of being a little too geeky here in Silicon Valley and sitting in front of your computer screen and thinking the entire economy exists of being able to deliver stuff to you at home.
It doesn't.
And I think there's a whole infrastructure out there which actually serves a human need to congregate and interact that is far more important than what we're talking about in e-commerce.
e-bite.
It's well known that you're just supposed to talk to the Iceman when he shows up.
Roger, editorial commentary, Roger?
I agree completely with Esther's comment about the challenges of the web commerce people actually handling the demand for their services over the next 2 or 3 years. While I think Stuart's got it right in the long-term sense, I do think there is a massive disruption coming. And the reason is that while pick, pack, and ship is something that's been done very well in the economy, it's actually never been done for the kind of problem that the web commerce brings to bear. Pick, pack, and ship's been done brilliantly at pallet levels by people like Walmart, and it's been done brilliantly against small SKU levels by LL Bean and people like that. It's never been done against N equals millions of customers
I
versus
depend on
N
Roger to
equals-
straighten me out. I really
Well,
appreciate that.
I do happen to think that Esther's right, that you're going to see some very important third-party businesses built to support the web on this. The flip side of which, though, is that I think that that is a limiting factor in how big web commerce can be as a percentage of the whole, particularly over the next 4 or 5 years. And I worry a lot about how Wall Street's going to react when it begins to understand that.
Well, I'm not sure what you call it, but I think there's going to be something that's kind of like EDI for web commerce, which is you get your toothpaste every week, but you don't go to the web to order it. You order it once, and then it's delivered in a steady stream. And so you have stuff happening not over the web in its traditional form, but you have all kinds of devices in your refrigerator that know that you've run out of orange juice. And so the web becomes less important and all these other interfaces between refrigerators and lock boxes that know when the stuff was delivered. And
You bet, but somebody still has to take it out of the warehouse, put it
Yeah,
in a
sure.
box, and get it to FedEx.
All I'm trying to
And
say is
that's
it's not
a big problem.
It's not the randomness of the web where anybody can talk to anybody. There's going to be more, suddenly, yes, you will have a relationship. It's not going to be very meaningful, but it's going to be toothpaste every 15 days when you run out. And
Boy,
it's-
you brush your teeth a lot.
If you had listened to the popular press, China is viewed in many ways now as Japan was in the 60s and 70s. It's a low-cost labor repository. And I actually think that China and what's going on there today is the biggest competitor to Silicon Valley and a more serious competitor to the quality of life that we lead here than anything we've encountered since we were formed. I've had a chance to be there now 6 times, 7 times after next month in the last year. And I've learned a lot. I read a book that I met this fellow, Robert Temple, and he wrote a book about the genius of China. And I only have 2 minutes, so I just want to talk about the intellectual history of China. I was important. Bear with me a minute. I was in Germany 2 weeks ago, and I gave a keynote speech, and it basically went, you guys think Gutenberg invented movable type. It was invented in China 500 years before Gutenberg thought of it. And then I went through the compass, gunpowder, the stirrup, the decimal system, the seismograph, the parachute, and a 2,000-year history of rich intellectual achievement. And then I started looking at, walk through one of the companies that John and I have funded in technology and see how many Asian and Chinese engineers are working in the lab. Count the number of PhDs that are graduating in China every year and compare them to Silicon Valley or to the US. It's over 2 to 1. Perfect analogy almost is to go to Israel in the 1970s when we had a wave of Israelis working in Silicon Valley companies and went back and started a wave of technological revolution that we all see and use. What I've noticed in the last year in China is the number of people who had the following characteristics. Born in China, got a PhD in a high-tech degree, EE physics here, worked in a great Silicon Valley company, accomplished something, and then went home, and I'm listening to this presentation, and I stopped them, and I opened the blinds on the room I was in, and I looked out, and I looked around, I closed the blinds, and I sat down, and I finished listening to their presentation. And they said, why'd you do that? And I said, because I've been here an hour, and there's nothing I can tell from your presentation that doesn't make me think I'm in Palo Alto. And I had to be sure that I was in Shanghai. So my point is, we are now at the cusp where Japan was probably in the late 70s, early 80s, where they went from what they were then to reinventing manufacturing and to becoming innovators and taking over basically the auto industry and the consumer electronics industry pretty big time. I think that if we sat here a year from now, we're going to be surprised by at least one or two major leading innovations, not low-cost copies of things we do, that come out of China that cause us to sit up and say, you know, we've got a competitor there, and these guys are well-educated and have a work ethic that may even shame our own. End of speech.
To some extent, this is already happening in the sense that vendors are jumping in, but we're way behind Europe and China in this happening. I think partly because more kids are using computers than I am. But what's really happening here is the internet changes geography. Everybody knows that. It used to change geography and making China closer. Now what it's doing is changing geography in the link between physical and virtual is getting more ubiquitous. It's not just the person sitting in front of the PC, but they're linked to the internet as they move around, as they're in cars, wherever they go. The other thing that's happening is time. Suddenly, the way you time things has changed dramatically. If you watch your kids, they don't schedule in advance. They say, I'll text you Friday night, I'll let you know where I am, come find me. The way people make appointments, the way I was sitting in the car coming down here with somebody who was doing a schedule with his wife by text. You no longer need to plan as much in advance. So that changes, some of it's cell phone, but a lot of it's text. And as we get better calendaring systems, there's going to be more texting. So there's that part. Then the other is, I think there's going to be a huge number of text-based applications. For example, why can't you get a text message every time you or someone else tries to use your credit card? If it's someone else, you'd really like to know about it. If it's you, you just say, okay, that's me, no problem. I think in everything from fraud detection to being reminded to take your meds, to finding out where your kid is, to knowing when the school bus is coming, these local mobile applications are going to grow dramatically. Second, I think you're going to see a lot of photo blogging, which is, I didn't mention it here, but call it picture messaging or multimedia messaging, is going to grow as well.
He said green is the new red, white, and blue. And as we enter 2006, we find ourselves in trouble and at home because we're led by defeatists and wimps. Sorry, but being green, focusing the nation on more efficiency and conservation, is not some liberal tree-hugging girly man kind of issue. In fact, it's actually the most tough-minded, economic, patriotic thing that's geostrategic, pro-growth, pro-opportunity that we can ever do. Living green, he says, is not for sissies. Our energy gluttony, mine, perhaps yours, fosters and strengthens all kinds of petrolist regimes. Authoritarian petrolism in Russia, Venezuela, Nigeria, Sudan, and Central Asia. It empowers Islamism in Sudan, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. And no matter what happens in Iraq, we cannot dry up the swamps of authoritarian and violent Islamism in the Middle East without drying up our consumption of oil by bringing down the price of crude. The difference between $20 a barrel crude oil and $60 a barrel crude oil is the difference between national security and not. So we need a president, we need a Congress with the guts not just to invade Iraq, but also to impose a gasoline tax and inspire real conservation at home. We need a real energy policy with long-term incentives for renewable energy, wind, solar, biofuels. I hope I'm not losing you. Rather than the welfare for oil companies and special interests that masqueraded as last year's energy bill, which I would add was actually the sum of all lobbyists. There was not one mention in that bill about vehicle efficiency standards. We need more green entrepreneurs. in the past 4 years, Kleiner has backed 5 green entrepreneurs, and I'm ready to start talking about it because they're ready to bring their products to market this year. And I think that green is going to be the biggest economic trend of the 21st century. So green is the new red, white, and blue.
You're jonesing for the green paddles here, baby. I just want to warn you, John is the only one that does his homework of this crowd, but it was good homework.
Green has been underhyped.
Underhyped. Okay, how do we feel about that panel? Green or red? This separates the Democrats from the Republicans.
Whoa!
Hey, do I get a
We
sign?
have a smart audience out here.
So what does that make you, Joe? A libertarian?
Bye.
Okay, so the rest of you are going to suck up to John. I'm going to ask Joe what's happening
so
here.
Tony, I actually don't think this is a political issue at all. I think this is absolutely an issue of, I put up green not because I see that it's happening, but because I desperately hope it will happen. And I will tell you, when we get to one of my future picks, it's in effect the reason why everybody ought to focus on this one from a career perspective, because I do believe that we focus on the wrong issues when we think about national security. Public health and energy are the two things that I think are the greatest perils to our economy and to our way of life. And, you know, realistically, this valley is equipped and way more focused to do something about this than any other region in the country. And by the way, we have nothing better to do.
Okay, and Joe, you had half a panel up there. Paddle.
Well, I think my opening comment tonight would be, how many of you remember those tests you took? I think they were IQ tests, and they'd show you different shapes, and they'd say, which one of these doesn't belong? You know, I look at this panel, and I want to raise my hand here, you know. I hope, John, I really hope you're right. I want to kind of put 2 points on the table, and I mean I hope you're right. Nancy and I, my wife, get a little commercial in, who managing partner, more David Al. We're building a new house in St. Helena. We decided we wanted to try to keep it off the grid. And so we're doing everything, and I won't bore you with all of the technologies that we can find to do that. If you have 2 venture capitalists and a family financing it, you can almost make it work today. We got a long way to go. And the challenge we have is we've got a whole bunch of national laws, and we've got a whole bunch of, you know, it's still a subsidized business. And I'm speaking of solar power, I'm speaking of energy, earth, and heat transfer, and all of these things. But let me tell you what I really worry about. If I'm less coherent than normal, it's because Monday I was in China, Tuesday I was in Japan, yesterday I was in New York, and I flew home this morning. And I have 2 kids. How many of you have college kids in college? So they're radical, doesn't matter how they grew up, they're radical environmentalists. And they come home and they tell me, you know, I got to sell the big car and I got to do all this. And having been in China again, Shenzhen this week, I say to them, you know, if we went to the point where we had 0 emissions and our cars were all hydrogen cars, we wouldn't impact the quality of the environment on Earth 1 iota. And so yes, we have to do it, and yes, we have to set an example, but we've got to understand while the 300 million of us are trying to do that, there's 1.3 billion people in China and over 1 billion people in India who have air so bad that after 2 or 3 days of being there, you have to get on a plane and come home.
So, but wait a minute, Joe. What should we do about this?
I don't know that I know the answer to that.
What should innovators do?
Okay, John, I think it'd be fun to hear about, because what you're saying here, and you guys are brilliant at investing, but give us an example of one of your 5 companies and why you think it's a good investment, just from a pure business.
Okay, so the highest risk, highest return one, which is a stealth company, is trying to address the problem of storage, and you can't store energy today effectively, economically. But if you could store enormous amounts of energy effectively and economically, Skip hydrogen. I'm short on hydrogen. The hydrogen car, hydrogen fuel cell, that doesn't solve any problems. But just imagine with me a magical way to store energy, always, infinitely, at incredibly lower cost than batteries. Then you'll make all electric cars. You'll put energy storage out on the grid so that during nighttime, for example, when you're not air conditioning, you can store energy. Storage would be an enormous innovation. So would effective solar that's cost effective and doesn't require silicon as a substrate. So would solid oxide fuel cells that really work not as storage systems but generate electricity in a distributed way, reliable at lower than grid cost, and do so with only 40% of the carbon emissions of current systems. So would 2 other innovative companies. I've described 4 of the 6 that we've backed. Any of those will have a big impact. Moving to biofuels, Brazil will be oil independent a year from now. All of their cars are flex fuel cars. How many people know that every Ford Taurus is flex fuel? It'll run on 85% ethanol, 15% petroleum. And the United States could simply redefine what ethanol is away from the way that Archer Daniel Midlands wants it to be. Instead, have it be cellulosic fiber. Instead of the top of the corn, it can be the stalk. And you know what? We can grow enough energy in America and pay farmers, instead of paying them not to grow stuff, they can grow stuff that we can use either from biomass or from corn to achieve energy independence. The real trend, and we were asked to give negative trends also, and the one that scares me personally and that scares me for the world and that I think is an important innovation and economic opportunity, is that the greatest terrorist threat that we face may very well be Mother Nature. And I think that America in particular, the wealthiest nation in the world, is grossly, criminally unprepared for pandemic. And that pandemic preparedness, and we could say also biodefense, is the most urgent and highest priority that we have for innovation. How can I best make this case? Cough. Steve will know exactly, but it was like 5 or 6 months ago, the covers of Science and Nature showed that scientists had sequenced the 1918 flu virus by taking samples of someone who'd been frozen in Alaska, and they found it was avian in its origin. The 1918 flu killed more people than were killed in World War I and World War II. 400,000 Americans to 500,000, and an estimated 40 million people around the world. Now, 30,000 Americans die every year of ordinary influenza. And you probably remember last year we couldn't even get enough ordinary flu shots for people with the ordinary flu. All the experts I talk to about avian flu say it's a question of when, not if. And when it mutates, which flu does all the time, to a transmissive form, human to human, we better hope that, one, it's not as virulent, that it kills people as much as the current reported cases are. And we ought to hope also that we have really superb global coordination in systems for, one, detection and surveillance, 2, diagnosis, 3, antivirals, way better than Tamiflu, which costs $60, is not thermally stable, can't be used in Africa, and for which there's already a resistant strain in Vietnam. And then 4, that we have actually the ultimate solutions, which are vaccines, that are far better than the current 30-year-old technology, growing this stuff in eggs and trying to guess what it's right. And then number 6, that we find a way to calm the cytokine storms in lungs that tend to kill people. And I'm really worried about this. I think it's a moral issue, it's an economic issue. When we had SARS, I think the gross domestic product of the world went down by like 1 or 2 percentage points for a quarter, okay? So this thing is going to devastate 1 billion people in Africa who are living on healthcare budgets of $1 to $5 per day, per year, I mean. They have like no hope, no protection, and it's spread to Turkey. When we have avian flu in the wild bird population in the United States, the stock market's going down, that's for sure. But that's not the important consequence. The important consequence, what we can do is rally innovators in the life sciences, in the information technologies, to innovate around those 5 areas that I talked about. And so that's my negative trend, call for actions, great big urgent worry.
one of the things, I don't know about all of you, but I see guys like CBS or Disney or most of the big media companies are sitting there talking about how they're going to monetize Web 2.0. And I had a simple question, which is embodied in this trend, which is, isn't there really a bigger thing going on here? You know, I don't know about you guys, but those of you who are over 40, we all grew up in a world where our media-based entertainment was entirely a passive activity. You know, you watch TV, you went to a movie, you went to listen to music, but, you know, it was passive, and they've delivered what you wanted. What Web 2.0 does is shift the power base. It not only gave consumers control of their entertainment choices, it actually gave them a whole set of tools to be their own entertainment choices. And so, to me, what's really profound about Web 2.0 is the self-expression and the fact that people are choosing active over passive media, and it's not just young people. Digital photography is a transformational thing across a really wide demographic. And this whole notion that we're going to monetize all this, I find a little hard to believe. There are 2.5 million rock and roll bands on MySpace, half of which have never played a show. I mean, the point for them is not to be discovered and to have an album contract. It's that they made music, put it on MySpace, and a couple of their friends listened to it. And, you know, I am sure that there's some way to monetize that. I am quite sure, however, that it's not with the kind of advertising that has historically dominated the world we live in today. And I think this bodes very poorly for sort of a lot of big branded product. I think this bodes very poorly for essentially all big media conglomerates. And I think it's really great for consumers. I think we are all better off being actively engaged in our entertainment rather than passively absorbing what other people throw at us. And so I personally find this a really entertaining thing, and if I wanted to make money on it today, I would find some way to re-engineer the advertising business or re-engineer some big brands and help them get it right.
Well, this is a fun one. Is it up there? Oh, yeah.
That's it.
Yeah.
It's up there.
Now, I'm not talking about synthetic life in the computer sense. I'm talking about microbes, living things that reproduce, little green vats. And the reason this is going to be important, of course, is that it really will, you know, shake the foundations of some people's beliefs and will, I think, be a symbolic step to a very important industry that will affect energy and materials and such. So why might this happen in the next year? Well, a lot of progress has been made. In 2002, people synthetically formed a virus from scratch. And what do I mean by synthetically? That means you write a little Word document, give me an A, give me a G, give me a C, give me a T, and just write the code of life, farm it out to a bunch of fabs around the world. There's many of them that will send you back snippets of DNA code, oligos, that you then stitch together and stick in the nucleus of some organism, and off it goes, and it's a new life form. Well, that's been demonstrated in little baby steps till now. People synthesized polio in 2002. It was a bit of a stunt, gaining some notoriety for doing that, and none of the labs that generated the code knew that they were contributing to that project until it all came together. Well, sometime in the next year, you know, to be conservative, let's say 2, but I think it'll be in the next 6 months, you'll see a reproducing organism that's on the scale of a bacteria, something that can, you know, eat a food source, reproduce in a lab environment. And that's pretty important because when you can do that, you can write the code in a very parsimonious way, and you can bring intelligent design to the information systems of biology. You can do purposeful work instead of random cut and paste and knockouts and what have you. It will dramatically accelerate the ability of the biotech industry, broadly defined, to do things in industrial biotech initially. Not even thinking about the long-term implications on medicine and other fields. But in the near term, using these bugs to harvest energy from the sun, to produce biofuels from diverse feedstocks are very compelling applications. And the reason is that nature has really clean, inherently green ways of doing this. Right? This is what millions of years of evolution have given us, is incredibly efficient pathways. The seawaters alone provide pathways within their viruses and bacteria that are much more efficient than photosynthesis and naturally process the hydrocarbons of life. The way in which this will come about has one other important step that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is that you can actually suck the entire bolus of DNA out of some of these simple single-cell organisms, put an entirely foreign batch in, and have it pick up and execute. In other words, you can swap out the entire code base of a life form and have it change species. And that's been demonstrated, not yet published. So that's an important precursor that until it was done, we didn't know if that would be a gotcha. Now, why energy and materials? Well, you know, these things live in a fluid medium. They like a three-dimensional world. They like to live in fluids. So you naturally want to process things in that way. So it's, you know, eventually going to apply to electronics and a variety of other fields. But initially, doing things with hydrocarbons makes a lot of sense. And as we'll hear later in one of the other forecasts, there's a compelling need to do things in a clear and compelling way. To give you a sense of how much progress has been made in this field, just if you haven't watched it and you blink, it makes Moore's Law look like it hasn't been moving. And I'll just share a couple of facts. In the last 12 months, one research team has discovered 90% of all known genes on the planet. This is Craig Venner shotgunning sequencing the ocean water microbes and viruses. He didn't care what animals they came from. He just wants the gene sets, because in this new world, you don't need to find the source organism. You just write the code of life and do experiments with those genes, these putative genes that are very interesting in materials transduction. More importantly, 100 times as many genes have now been discovered in the last 12 months and involved with energy transduction and energy conversion than have been known to science through all of human history. Again, in the last 12 months, one research team, just recently published earlier this month. So it's a brave new world we're entering. When you can re-engineer the information systems biology, you can borrow, if you will, from the notes and the greatest hits of evolution, and you can re-engineer them purposefully to do useful work. And I think this will be one of the major vectors by which the green revolution will truly be green.
Wow. This is particularly impressive since Tim Draper said you've never even experimented with hallucinogenics.
You've got 4 examples of early experiments right here on the stage, so.
Well, I see you're going to solve your own problems on the next one, Joe. But anyway, anybody want green, red? Wow.
Look, everything I ever knew about that subject, I just learned in the last 2 minutes.
So, John, care to comment here? Or?
Well, this strikes really close to home. You saw earlier this year, British Petroleum committed $500 million to R&D centered at UC Berkeley. And the late and very respected Richard Newton of UC Berkeley, Dean of the Engineering School, before he died of pancreatic cancer, grabbed me by the shirt collars and said, "John, synthetic biology is the great new platform. Make sure you understand it." There's a team there that's far down the road with a practical product of what's been described, and that's to look at the essential compound in anti-malarial drugs. It's called Artemisinin, and a course of anti-malarial drugs is 60 cents a treatment. Now, we run down to the corner drugstore and we can afford to buy that. But the 10 million people a year who die of malaria in Africa, they can't. There's not a corner drugstore and they can't afford it. So these scientists set out to re-engineer those bugs. And it's exactly as described. They take a microbe, they analyze the DNA in it, they splice in some new stuff, and all of a sudden you have this living thing that ingests sugar from vats of warm water, digests it, and then excretes it. There's a more commonplace word for that. And the excreted product is Artemisinin, but it costs 1/10 of what it would have otherwise. So I think the scientists doing that are going to win a Nobel Prize.
Jay Kiesling and his
Jay
group.
Kiesling, exactly.
And he's doing biodiesel.
Well, so we funded this company that he's working on that's working on biofuels, and I think it's very exciting. Remember how they always used to say the future's in biology? That's what we're telling our kids. That's what I'm telling my daughters. I think this is a very important frontier, and it's exciting that California is the best place in the world to do biotech research, and the Bay Area is the best of all those. So, pretty cool stuff.
I got Storm and Norman with his green card. All right. How many of you just learned about this tonight? Okay. San Jose Mercury headline. All right. Last two. Dr. Joe, you're up.
I'm not last, all right. All right, I'm going to get personal for a minute. One of the...
We're going to talk about your brain?
Yeah, well, small subject. Synthetic life form. How many of you have personally or in a close family member experienced some form of what we call mental illness, depression, anxiety disorder, schizophrenia, we should see about 30, 40% of the hands go up, which is what we're seeing. At the forum this year, we had Dr. Tom Insel, who is the head of the National Institute of Mental Health. And because the people who go to Davos are CEOs and board members, the catchphrase in the particular session was, how many of your board members are mentally ill?
How many venture?
And we signed up, we put a hall for 100 people because they're sign-up sessions, and there were about 200 people that couldn't get in. And the session could have gone twice as long. Here's what Tom told us. We used to think of it as mental illness. It's the wrong word. It really is a brain disorder. We now know and can prove that for many forms of mental illness, something is physically wrong in the brain. And we are, in understanding the brain, about where we were 10 years ago with respect to cancer in two important ways. One, we're beginning to understand early cause effect, which we have to understand, quote, the disease path before we can fix it. And two, we're beginning to talk about it. 10 years ago, you would not have had a John Edwards coming on national TV saying, my wife has cancer, with her standing there. It would have been hidden. It would have been a secret. We didn't talk about it. It was a closet disease. Now you have Tony Snow Edwards. He wants the same thing, and I think it needs to happen with mental illnesses. It's really a brain disease. And what he's talked about is taking $1 billion from the national government this year that in previous years might have gone to psychiatrists and cognitive behavior therapy, not that they're wrong, but is going to go to neurobiology. And I started doing some work, and I found a database that had over 100 startups in California that are doing some real forms of brain research across the board, from genetic causes and effects. And so I think if we come back here each year for the next 10 years and we track that, we're going to see some very interesting understandings and breakthroughs for diseases that, as you saw from hand raises, materially affect a lot of us and have a very, very devastating effect on the overall productivity, not only of our economy, but all economies. And this is one where I think the United States can take some leadership.
Within 5 years, everything that matters to you will be available on a device. That fits on your belt, along with the other 6 that Roger has, or in your purse, which Roger only has on weekends. This will cause a massive shift in internet traffic from PCs to smaller devices.
So the thought process here is that I'm actually explicitly not talking about cell phones. I'm really saying devices. And let's focus on North America for a moment. The biggest problem we all have is no one has enough time. And the internet as currently constructed is an extension philosophically of what the PC industry was. PC industry converted everyone into a clerk by making you do your own word processing and your own, everybody became a typist again, which wasn't true 30 years ago. And the web, whenever you want something, forces you to go and look for it explicitly. And none of us has enough time. When Google was brand new, it was a tremendous time saver. Now 9 million results in 9/10 of a second is not a helpful outcome. We need filters, we need things that save us a lot of time. And one of the core things is this notion of always being available. In a sense, a level of presence that exists on your body. And in my mind, one of the things that's beautiful about this is that we're talking about essentially an infinite number of design centers here because, again, the power and form factor constraints do not allow you to put all the things we would want into one device. In fact, it doesn't even allow you to put all the things you want into 3 devices. So the result is people are going to be able to make lots and lots of choices because the psychographics of these things are fascinating. You can take people in the same office with the same job and the same education, and they will make fundamentally different choices about the mobile device that they would like. But the core thing, because they actually, right now there's so many individual features that stick up from one product to the next that you can now really finely slice what you want. And that's going to happen much more so as this next generation of operating systems, things like the iPhone, become much more pervasive. And I just believe that if you should all get a Kindle and study this thing, because things like that are going to be all over. And imagine if you reverse the model there so it uploads automatically, okay? And I believe that we live in a world where, I think that Apple's actually got it long run wrong, because I don't think produced content, movies and pre-recorded music, is most of what you're going to do on these small devices. I actually think creating content is the vast majority of what people are going to do. In fact, that's what the evidence is already. And so that these things, people will have different design centers because they do different things. And this is back to Joe's, Facebook generation. And I just believe that within 5 years, your life is going to be made materially better, because the algorithm that Palm and RIM did with email on devices, where you got the email done between when the plane landed and your hotel. Therefore, you got 45 minutes more sleep at night because you weren't doing email in your room. That is worth $50 billion to RIM and probably $70 billion to Apple, that essential notion. And I believe that you will see that all over the economy, and it will come from a lot of people that we don't even know and don't even expect today.
All right, green or red? Red. Red.
Cool.
Wow. Okay, Vinod.
Well, I have the same objection to it, which I had, that it's something that's sort of already happened, and so it's happening, it'll continue to happen, and I would agree with Roger if he said it'll go from 3% to 80%, but to me, it's not a new trend.
One quick.
Steve.
I agreed with that it's goodness, and the part of the trend I quibble with is the prediction of the magnitude of the effect. Their second line, which I'm not sure if is what you meant to defend, is that there would be a shift in internet traffic.
I believe that you will see, I forgot to mention that line, I believe that you'll see within 10 years that more internet traffic is coming off of devices that are on your person than than the sum of everywhere else put together.
Great.
And
that was the laser focus I violently disagree with.
That is the essence of the thing. That
So
when it's on your body, it's much more important.
The problem is the amount of traffic, and I agree that will go up exactly like you predict, but there's going to be even greater growth in fixed line internet or stationary internet that dwarfs it, and that's going to be HDTV over IP. And Cisco and 10 different market researchers estimate that 60 to 80% of all internet traffic will be that. You're at home on a big screen TV watching movies.
If I make the statement, then number of transactions.
Yeah, then you've got it.
Okay, if I do it on number of transactions, then we can be comfortable.
It won't be things on
because I don't think in 5 years we'll be able to have the HDV over IP.
It'll be the regular TV over there, and it's going to swamp.
I'm not disputing that. I'm just a question of timing.
Actually, it won't be things on your person. It'll be cameras. We're headed to a world where there'll be more fixed cameras on the internet that have IP addresses than any number of phones people carry. I'm building a project, a house, and I'm putting in a security system, and it doesn't cost a lot of money to put 10 cameras in.
Why did you go green? If that's true, then why did you go green?
Because I still agree with you.
You like me.
I like you.
You thought all the other guys.
I like you.
Okay, got it.
You needed one green. That's
I
why.
did.
All right. We're going to let somebody else in the conversation. Vinod.
But you're right.
I was just going to pick up on one little thing Steve said. Cisco and the experts say 80% will be XYZ. The Black Swan book I mentioned is all about why not to trust experts. I didn't give you the numbers. AT&T, McKinsey predicted less than 1 million phones. There were 109 million phones 20 years later. And AT&T, in fact, divested the cellular business back then because of this forecast. It is important not to trust the experts. They are generally extrapolations of the past. That's what economists and econometrics is all about. The best way to look at the future is the way Alan Kay suggested, that the best way to predict the future is to invent it. And I truly believe that is, in fact, what will determine the future. Almost anything we can put our mind to, we can invent. And in fact, if it's valuable enough, and presented the right way with enough caveats will in fact become the future.
So Vinod, let me pick up on that point and ask you whether you agree or disagree with the following statement. It is my belief that the things that we currently view as mobile devices are about 1% of the feature set I expect within 10 years. And therefore, when I make this comment about this thing, I'm talking about something that radically alters life, the way that BlackBerry and Trios did by giving you that 45 minutes back. I mean, that 45 minutes for those of us who travel a lot, that is a huge fucking, pardon my French, huge fucking deal.
Sorry.
Okay? And
We're family, go ahead.
yeah, and so
Now, I do agree that this device will be transformative of our lifestyles beyond being a device you do phone communications over.
well, and I'm suggesting that people are remarkably nearsighted when they're thinking about the evolution of phones. To me, the astonishing thing was how shocked people were by the iPhone and how shocked everybody was by the Kindle. You know, because nobody really thought about, I mean, it's hard to believe that people didn't really think about how useful it would be to have WYSIWYG web on a small device. And nobody really thought about how useful it would be to have a wireless system that you didn't have to subscribe to use. And I'm saying, imagine all the other stuff you're not thinking about. Okay? It's all coming. I mean, and the most interesting thing is once your expectations start rising, they rise a lot more rapidly than Moore's Law. I mean, Moore's Law goes like this, right? And all these components are going like this. But you look at that iPhone, right? And you know, you say to yourself, well, geez, what if it had, you know, like, what if it actually really worked? What would I want then?
Hey, speaking of which, do you guys think that Kleiner Perkins, when they raised a fund, the iPhone app fund, give me a green or red if you think that's a good idea?
I love it. I mean, look.
This is a fund, it's a $100 million fund where they're investing 100% of the money into iPhone application companies. Is that right?
I love that. I love that.
Okay, you like it? So you're predicting that Vinod's conflicted. Is that why you're not voting? So you're saying that the iPhone in and of itself will become a major new platform?
No. They said iPhone for marketing reasons to get it covered. It has nothing to do with the iPhone. It has to do with an architecture.
Oh,
think the right way to think about
So you know
this,
something that we don't know.
No. I just look at marketing. No, it's about computer architectures.
Right.
It won't work on anything where you have to write to the hardware, but it will work. All the things they do will work on anybody who has got a modern mobile architecture. Which at the moment there's only one, but eventually there'll be more than one.
Okay, so want to throw Roger's trend out to the crowd? Green or blue?
Blue.
Or green or
Red, green.
shame
Guys
on
over
me.
here just don't vote.
I'm a red
Same
state guy and I
intensity.
said blue.
Very low.
No.
It was anemic 38%.
Okay, anemic 30%.
No, it was actually more. That was like red. Was probably
Okay, you guys are loving the mobiles.
Here we go. So
First of all, I don't have a company or a particular portfolio business in this segment, so I'm not trying to promote anything here. So that's the spirit of full disclosure. The other thing is I noticed in 2008 there were 3 mobile things mentioned in some form or another. What this aims to do is to build on applications on top of mobile and social networks, which are sort of converging into one big opportunity. So the crowdsourcing part of this is what Vinod was talking about as far as applications on top of crowdsourcing. And then the mobile piece is what happens with the iPhone world and the app stores and so forth. So why is this important? Other than advertising, almost all of the success of the internet today rests on one single business model, which is ad-based. And you can even take Amazon into that. I mean, I was at Amazon for a number of years back when we were shipping physical products and we thought we were going to make money that way. Today's Amazon makes money by building a marketplace where essentially every one of those links that take you to a product is in fact an ad. So, and they essentially revenue share. So you can call it revenue share or you can call it an ad, but it's the same thing. They make more money on not shipping goods but referring customers to other goods that they want to buy than shipping goods out of their own warehouses. So most of it is based on this ad model. There needs to be a new model if there needs to be more and more growth. And I think that new model is emerging in the form of applications. So in the last year, there were over 3 billion applications downloaded on the internet, and most of those were either on social networks or on phones. So if you think about that, that's 40 to 50 million daily active users. Now, today, less than 5% of them are paid applications, and that's okay because the trend is increasingly towards paid applications. Now, the average application that a user pays for costs the same as iTunes. It's 99 cents up to $2.99 or $3.99. I think there's a threshold at which the user won't pay. For example, many of you have call waiting on your phones, and you pay $3.99 a month. Do you even use it once a month? You don't. But you don't think a second time about paying for it because you want the convenience of it. In this case, a lot of users will pay for applications up to $2 or $3. And so there's this new app economy emerging that I think will become an important trend. Now, there are lots of little companies in this space. There is not going to be a big winner, at least none that I can see. But if you aggregate all of these companies, it's equivalent to $1 billion of revenue and perhaps a $10 billion market cap business. So it's a viable opportunity. It's real. It's out there. It just will not support large companies today. So I would say that this is a trend and a real trend, and one that will continue to grow because you know for sure that as Facebook grows and as the smartphone industry continues to grow the way they are, there is going to be a need for new revenue sources to support these companies and these activities. For example, as voice rates continue to drop, you can see the flat rate data plans are actually filling the gap in revenue for the AT&Ts and the Verizons of the world on the one hand. On the other hand, you know, the Facebooks of the world are going to need an application-based economy to support their business over time, because it's clear that ads are not going to support that model. So this is why I think this is an important trend and one that on which you can build real companies.
Panelist? Wow.
Anne, why do you disbelieve?
Well, I mean, I agree with this being in a lot of cottages, so a cottage industry. 10 billion isn't that big when it comes down to it. So I think it's really, really interesting for small businesses.
Today. 10 billion is today.
Yeah. I think it's really interesting. You know, I still think there's a lot of friction in this model for the mobile phone. They're called carriers. And you know, that's why people don't use most of this stuff, because you know it's impossible to actually figure out what you have on your phone or how to use it. I think it's possibly the one thing I do agree with is in the coming decade, but it seems like it's got a lot of friction to this model still, and also
I completely disagree. I think user interfaces are being optimized. I think you've got better operating environments on these phones in terms of the browsers and so forth. The applications are easy to download and use. We are at the beginning of this trend, and the beginning of it is already a potentially $1 billion revenue stream with probably 3,000-4,000 little businesses being supported under it. I think it's only going to accelerate. Now, whether it'll support venture-backed companies, there I have to agree with Ann. It's probably not a venture opportunity.
If you're coming out of a university today and you're a smart person and you've got a computer science degree, you know, you're going to send your resume to Google, who's not hiring, or Hewlett-Packard, who's not hiring, or Cisco, who's not hiring in the U.S., or any other great companies, or you're going to do what about 100,000 people did and go off and write an iPhone app and see if you can't make a buck. It's the new world.
An interesting question is, where would, you know, we've been talking about the mobile opportunity, which I agree with, because, again, I quoted earlier, but there are twice as many mobile users, phone users, as people use the internet. So if you say, hey, all the phones become internet enabled, that doubles the amount of internet users, which is a huge ramp. But where would we be today if there was no iPhone? You know, it just seems like iPhone was like this breakout, out of the nowhere technology that is.
That's what it always takes.
But if you go to,
but we couldn't have predicted that like 2 years ago. It's just kind of interesting.
Nobody did if you go back through the last 10 years.
I think we're too U.S.-centric in our thinking here. If you travel around the world, they don't have iPhones, and they're using a lot of data applications on there. The other thing on walled gardens, I think those walled gardens of AT&T and Verizon are coming down because they're seeing revenue, they're seeing dollar signs, and they're saying we're going to open up our networks to these applications. And they will do revenue share deals, and they will build their own app stores and take the 30% margin on it. And as the iPhone prices come down to much lower levels, and Apple can no longer make money on the hardware, which is the big place where they have been making money, they're going to need to have these applications be the source of their revenue.
Particularly in emerging markets, it's mobile devices that are going to be driving the future. You go to India and China, the devices that are used could not be less like the iPhone, and yet they are becoming very quickly the dominant digital platform.